to this latest news. We'll see if he can hear us. John? Okay, well, we will do certainly much more on this. There will be a big rally today. Stay tuned for tomorrow's coverage. By the way, Democracy Now! Will be broadcasting from the Democratic Convention in Chicago, August 19th to 23rd. We will be expanding to 2 hours daily broadcasts as we did covering the Republican National Convention. You can tune in then and tell your friends and stations they can air Democracy Now!, the special expanded War, Peace, and the Presidency. That does it for our show. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez for another edition of Democracy Now!, Grassroots Global News Hour.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarlane, host of the Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 98.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along. What an exciting day. What an exciting day for Minnesota. You know, the world is changing before our very eyes, and I think all of us are happy and lucky to be part of a system of seismic change, global change. And what's wonderful is that we here in Minnesota, I can say, based on today's news, are at the center of that with the selection of our governor, Tim Walz, to be the running mate for Vice President Kamala Harris, who's the presumptive nominee, in fact, the actual nominee of the Democratic Party. She's the candidate for president of the United States of America. Well, today we're going to talk about politics and about the election locally, nationally, global implications. We also want to thank Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! What a wonderful program. I'm glad that this program follows hers. It's an appropriate intro to the topics we care about and we talk about here in Minnesota. I want to invite all of you who are listening on KFAI and those who are connecting with us through our social media platforms to support this program by becoming a subscriber. Costs you nothing, and it means that you get notification when we go live every Tuesday. And in fact, throughout the week, we broadcast live on Tuesdays, but we stream 5 days a week at this hour, 1 o'clock. And as an incentive, we want to support you and support our local economy, our local sports teams. We've got some tickets to the Minnesota Twins baseball games. And if you simply send a text message or a comment to one of our social media platforms with the word baseball on it, and hopefully make a comment about this conversation about politics in the country, in Minnesota, the selection of Governor Tim Walz to be on the Harris-Walz presidential candidacy team, or about any of the topic that you're interested in, we would enter your name into an opportunity to win a pair of great seats to a Minnesota Twins baseball game sometime in the month of August. So we want to connect with you. We want to tell you how much we value you for being the great audience you are here in Minnesota on KFAI and across the world, actually, on our social media platforms. We're streaming on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on YouTube. But to become a subscriber, go to YouTube, Insight News MN, subscribe, like, and share. Well, with that, we want to welcome Minnesota Representative Esther Agbaje, who represents the North Minneapolis Community District 59B. Representative, welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Again, it's always a pleasure to see you and have you on the program. What a day, what a day. When you woke up this morning, What did you think about the nomination of our governor to be a candidate for vice president on the Harris team for the Democratic Party? What were your thoughts?
Thank you so much.
Maybe you knew it last night. I don't know.
No, thank you so much, Al. It's always great to be on the show. Yeah, I think I found out along with the rest of the world when everyone else did. I think CNN may have been the first to break it, and people started sharing that tweet. So for me, it's very exciting. I love Minnesota. I love whenever Minnesota is in the news for positive stuff, and we have a great governor. And I think Vice President Harris is making a fantastic pick with choosing Governor Walz.
I agree with you, and I think it puts us back at the center. It kind of brings back what I think is the best of historic Minnesota. I immediately went to thinking about the great legacy of Hubert Humphrey, the Happy Warrior. And what I heard with several commentators on CNN this morning was a reference to Tim Walz as the Happy Warriors. It's a throwback, and it may be kind of natural and organic, and it fits because Walz is that guy. He comes across, plain, ordinary, Minnesota lutefisk in a positive way, right? I mean, real Minnesota, real country, and genuine and authentic. And I think he's an excellent choice for the vice president. So I think that's a great thing. And then we have obviously the great former Vice President Walter Mondale, Senator Walter Mondale, candidate himself for the presidency. And so this is a path that has been successful in the past in adding to and building winning tickets. I'm hopeful the same thing will happen again. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I definitely believe that we can definitely win. But, I say that as a Democrat, but we are going to be doing all the work that we can to ensure that we are knocking on doors, that we're talking to folks, that we're letting them know that there is a space for them in this party. I think one of the really good things about moving to Vice President Harris has been this momentum that we've seen, this excitement for people who want to organize and mobilize. And we need to build on that to show people that, yes, electoral politics really important. We really want people to get out there and vote. But there's a whole world of civic engagement that people can be engaging in now on the issues that they care about. And we saw that this year, particularly in our legislative session, where we had longtime community advocates working really hard for the changes they wanted to see in Minnesota. And many of them were successful.
Well, going back to the national picture, I think that I was astounded and pleased to see after Vice President Harris's announcement, Black women in this country in a historic way rallied and had a Zoom or StreamYard call with over, I think, 44,000 people talking about why they support it. So activation, mobilization. Then, not to be outdone with Roland Martin, a collection of Black male-led organizations collecting the same amount of money or more, 101.5 million plus, for the Harris campaign. This is before she announced, obviously, that she'd have a running mate, but 50,000 Black men across the country saying that we're on board. So what that means to me in terms of potential for engagement, I used the phrase seismic before. That's not an understatement. I think something massive is happening at the base, and Black men and Black women are at the center of it. But the center that we represent is not an exclusive center. It is an inclusive center, and it invites everybody, all of our sisters and brothers of every, background to join us in ushering in our hope for what democracy can and should be. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I thought it was amazing to see pretty much every ethnic or identity group had their own call last week on some day or other. And there's still many more that are happening, actually. So I do think that there is this new excitement to be able to say, we have a person that we really want to get behind. We really want to be engaged. We also want to show our support. I mean, one of the really important things I think that happened out of those calls is the amount of money that was raised to ensure that Vice President Harris has the infrastructure that she needs to get across the finish line on November 5th. And so all of those calls show me, like you said, like we are inclusive. This isn't just a Black thing. And, but at the end of the day, it was one of my colleagues always likes to say is like, whatever is good for Black and brown Minnesotans is good for everyone. And I think that's true at the national level. When we're looking at how we can help those who have been most harmed by our system or are left behind currently, we actually build up everybody and everybody does better. And so I think that's really important to this ticket, really important to this campaign of wanting to make sure that everyone has a space. I think I even saw there might even be a Republicans for Harris call. So like, I think everybody's getting involved, and it's just really nice to have that energy. I think it's a breath of fresh air. I think there's a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of joy. And that's what politics should be. I tell people all the time that politics is about people. And when you care about people, when you're concerned about people, when you want to make life better for people, that's being political. And that's not a bad thing, but it just means that that's how we get involved in our community. And that's how we show our love and care for our community members.
I think my mic wasn't on, but it's on now. That problem is corrected. And also see the mayor, the Honorable Mayor Melvin Carter here from St. Paul. Mr. Mayor, welcome to the conversation. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's a beautiful day in St. Paul. I'm walking down the street having a good time on Selby Avenue. You know the street well. And we got a St. Paul resident headed to the White House.
Isn't that amazing?
It's a beautiful thing. It's exciting.
I couldn't help but get up this morning and drive over to East Cliff just to be in the energy flow. And I saw the caravan of media people there. When I got there, I'm going to call him Vice President, our
That's
potential
right.
Vice President,
That's right.
Walz, had already left, headed to the airport in a caravan,
That's right.
heading out to DC. But the energy is palpable. And what does it mean for St. Paul, for Minnesota? How do things like succession work if, let's say, presuming that the Harris Walz team wins?
That's right.
What happens in Minnesota? And I'll ask both you and Esther Agbaje, what happens in Minnesota in terms of how things move on the chessboard?
Well, one, it's not if they win, it's when they win. Our
you go.
representative talking about the energy that exists in the city, in our state. I've never seen it this high. I've seen it this high, and that was in 2008. The moment she took the top of the ticket, the energy just skyrocketed. We went from trying to recruit volunteers to trying to figure out how to manage all the volunteers who were coming in. You've seen the fundraising reports. The energy in this country is so high around this ticket. It's pretty incredible. Minnesota's made some really important decisions. We've decided, as our former Senator Paul Wellstone always used to say, that we all do better when we all do better. Thanks to the representatives' leadership, our legislature, our governor have worked to say, just make simple statements like, we're going to feed children in Minnesota. Like, we're going to make sure people higher education is possible for everybody in Minnesota. And to see those values uplifted on the national level is pretty important. You asked a mechanical question. Mechanically, when they win, the governor would resign as governor. Our Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, who's a great champion for families as well, who's been a great friend of mine for 20 years, would elevate into the governor's seat. And our Senate President, Bobby Joe Champion, who you know really well, who's been a great, it's in his name. He's a champion. He'll become our first African-American lieutenant governor in the state.
What would that be like? Lieutenant governor, first of all, the governor, Native American.
That's
great,
right.
A woman and great person, Native American, though. That's significant.
That's
Lieutenant governor, potentially, when it happens, African American, but also in the governing cabinet for the state, the Attorney General, African American, Keith Ellison. So 3 of the 5 executive positions occupied by people of color, unheard of.
That's right. That's exactly right. And listen, you've been in my office before, Al. I have a wall of the photographs of all of the former mayors of the city. And there are some good folks who had really good intentions and had good ideas and good passion for the city and for families. But in a country whose whole promise is that every child born in this city, every child born in this country is born with the equal chance to become the city's mayor, their state's governor, their country's president. When we look at that wall of former mayors and see all white men, we say, wait a minute, our city's more than half women. Our city is half people of color. There are people in our community who don't speak English as a foreign language. There's a lot of different folks in our community, and they've never gotten a chance to go. So when we see our offices of leadership diversify in that way, in ways that reflect the diversity and the brilliance of our community, it's significant for our communities of color, but it's even more significant for our whole democracy. It's us actually cashing the check that our whole country was built on in the first place.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm talking with Mayor of St. Paul, Mayor Melvin Carter, and Representative Esther Agbaje, who represents Senate District 59B in North Minneapolis. 59 district is the district that is led by Senator Bobby Joe Champion, who's president of the Minnesota Senate, and theoretically would move over to being the lieutenant governor when the Harris Walz teams takes office in January. Let me ask you both, Mayor and Representative, would you both share with our local and national audiences why it's important and what you believe about our governor being selected? What's he going to bring to the ticket, and what can he bring to the nation? Let me start with Esther and then go back to Mayor Carter. Esther, Representative.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what the governor brings to the ticket is really those kind of Midwestern values, right? Which, as we say, is everyone's values. So he has shown in his 4 years as governor, and particularly these past 2 years, is we care about feeding kids. We want to make sure that the state is a welcoming state to people, no matter who they are, no matter who they love, and that they can get the reproductive care that they need, because we all know that reproductive care is healthcare. The governor has also made it possible that if you make less than $80,000 in this state, you have access to higher education. We want people to be able to achieve their dreams. And if that means going to college, you have that opportunity in Minnesota now to go to college. I think all of those things are things that the national, like our national ethos is looking for. These are common sense ideas, common sense solutions to what is, ailing us in the United States. And so I think his approach, along with working with great people across our state, to finding those solutions that work for working class families, that work for working class people, that help all up and down the spectrum and just build that economic opportunity for whoever wants it, is what America needs. And I think that that's what he's going to bring to the Harris campaign. And I'm really excited for that.
Mayor Carter, you're a chief executive of a major city in Minnesota, the governor, chief executive of our state. What does he bring to the ticket? What does he bring to our nation?
Those values that the representative just talked about are absolutely critical. The experience that he has, not only translating those values into public policies like those that we've just discussed are critical, but the experience that he has leading through some really challenging situations, whether that's the COVID pandemic. I would say I was on calls like these during COVID with mayors whose governors were suing them because of their public health practices to try to keep them from protecting their residents from the coronavirus pandemic. We had the opposite. We had a great working relationship with the governor who was really supportive. We have somebody who understands that the job of a governor, the job of a vice president, the job of the federal administration is to facilitate success at the local levels. So I would expect him to stay in touch with folks like us, with mayors and representatives and county leaders and things like that around the country. But I think one of the greatest things that we're going to see over the next couple of months is his communication skills. We've already seen it. Literally in one interview, he changed the entire political conversation in our country by just saying,
that. Talk about that for a second. That's significant.
Well, 2 weeks ago, the governor went on national news and pointed out something I think that we've all felt. These guys are just weird. And it really landed home with a lot of folks, because a lot of the stuff that we're hearing from the Republican ticket really is weird. And, I heard the governor say yesterday, it wasn't an attack. It was just an observation. Like, a lot of this stuff, this conversation about cat ladies and laser sharks and things like that, like, those are part of our presidential dialogue here in a way that's just plain weird. And Governor Walz acknowledged that a couple of weeks ago, and it sort of took off like wildfire. One, Donald Trump, who's been called an insurrectionist, who has been convicted of 34 felonies, who's been found liable for sexual assault. I've never seen anything make him madder than being called weird. and they've been sort of defending and talking about it, and which is weird to me. That proves you're weird. But then too, it's really caught on, and we've seen the vice president herself use that language. And so we've seen some, and that's to me one of the biggest things that made me think, oh yeah, he's going to be her running mate, because as the governor of Minnesota, he went on national television and directed the national conversation that we're having now. So we'll see much more of that. Those communication skills will serve the campaign and the administration really well.
I think that was super significant, that observation you're making, Mayor Carter. I remember one of his early national appearances, and he was actually being challenged about using the word weird, but his response was, I'm not talking really about them, just stating an observation, but I'm stating it from the point of view of ordinary people like me. He said, when I see people who attend these rallies, they're like my cousins. They could be me. They're people that feel like the country in some way or another has failed them, and they've been attracted by this drumbeat that really does not ultimately serve them well. But I understand them. And so what I saw in that was an ability to extend empathy and a roadway, a pathway back to broad-based civility. And I think that he showed that. What do you think? His connection with working class, with farming class, with all kinds of people, that's really unique.
I really hope so. You know this, my history, Al. I was on the city council here in St. Paul for 6 years and then left to take an early childhood role in former Governor Dayton's administration. And I'd get in the car and drive to Owatonna or Thief River Falls or to, Bemidji, Brainerd, just different places around the state. And every time I got in the car, I thought I'm going to go learn about some foreign people that are completely different and have nothing in common with St. Paul. And I get there and I find hardworking people who are trying to make a better world for their kids, who are trying to pay the bills, who are trying to keep a good roof over their head, who, have the same type of frustrations as folks in St. Paul do. Somebody's been lying to us about kind of all of these different kind of, trying to tell us that we live on different planets. There's two Americas, there's all this type of stuff. When in fact, I think, it may sound cliche, but what connects us really is so much greater than what separates us. I think Governor Walz has been saying that for years through his mantra that we are one Minnesota. And if we need anything right now as a country, we need to tap into our ability to be one United States.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for dropping in. You're heading from somewhere to somewhere. Thank
you. From the mobile office, right.
Okay. And I invite you to come back anytime and often, because I think this is going to be an exciting time. I think that, as I said before you got on, we're experiencing something that's seismic in nature. And I think that we all are lucky, really, to be a part of it. And the only challenge is to make sure that each of us is fully excited enough and reached in a way that we feel both responsible and committed to adding our voice and our work and our funds, our treasury, to building the kind of future that we think we deserve and that represents the best that democracy can be. It's a work that's unfolding as we speak. But thank you so much for being here. And will you come back?
I'll definitely come back. You know that. It's really exciting. I mean, it's really amazing. You think about just all of the things that have happened in this presidential election, right? From one thing to the next, there's half a dozen things that have happened in this cycle that had a candidate had an attempted assassination, had a candidate been convicted of 34 felonies, had a candidate changed right before the convention. That one thing would have been the defining factor of any election in my lifetime. I think this is one of those moments, Al. I grew up asking my parents and grandparents, like, where were you, in Freedom Summer? Where were you after Pearl Harbor? And every generation has those moments that we ask our parents and account for what you did, account for how you participated in this moment. And if you didn't, account for why. I think we're in one of those moments right now as a country and maybe even as a planet that our children, our grandchildren are going to ask us in these moments when democracy was on the line, in these moments where women's rights and labor rights and rights for people in communities of color and immigrants' rights and all of our rights were seemingly on the line. How did you respond? I intend to have an answer that will satisfy my grandchildren, and I hope you do too. Not you, I
No,
know you will, but I hope
of
all of our
course.
viewers will too.
Absolutely. Milton Carter, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you in a minute, okay?
Thanks for having me on.
And Representative, let's keep the conversation going. Thanks to the mayor. But again, I'm just kind of over, not overjoyed, it's not the right word. Maybe it is the right word, but I'm excited. I'm just really motivated and I'm hopeful. That's what I'm hopeful. And I think that maybe before this stuff started unfolding, I was walking around with a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of angst and anxiety, a little bit of fear, and a little bit of exasperation, like making my exit plans. Like you've heard people say, if it happens again, I'm gonna get out of here, right? And they
Oh
don't
no,
mean that.
there were lists of places where Americans could go without without visas. So,
But to even have that consideration, you probably don't mean it, but you have to think that way because you think that something is about to happen that's not going to be good, and we see that potential. And so, I want to pivot back to the work that you're doing in North Minneapolis. I think that you've always been able to come forward and give kind of a recount of achievements and also share the challenges that remain. And I want to spend some time sitting in, the work at the neighborhood level, at the district level that you represent in North Minneapolis. So let me throw that to you to ask you to talk about what I thought was a phenomenal session in the legislature. But let's review what happened this past legislature, because all of this stuff adds up, I think.
oh gosh. Yeah, no, it does. We had an excellent 2 years, I will say. And this year in particular, I think a lot of people were like, well, what are you guys going to do now? I mean, you've done everything in 2023. And I was like, no, we definitely still have more to do. I think, particularly for this district and community members, one big piece of legislation that was really important to me, has been important to a lot of people, even previous legislators, is the African American Family Preservation Act. That bill has been around in some form or iteration for around 10-ish years. And then also was introduced, I think, officially in like the 2017 era. And so since then has been worked on. And this year we were able to get across the finish line. I'm so thankful to my legislative partner, Senator Bobby Joe Champion. He came in really strong for us. And of course, our main community leader, Khalees Houston. So the purpose of that bill is really to ensure that our child welfare services are doing their due diligence when it comes to ensuring that children, particularly children of color and particularly Black children, can stay with their families. So this doesn't mean that they get to stay with an adult that's treating them poorly, or if they have a parent that really cannot parent, but it's that if that person really cannot parent, are you calling other people in their network, in their family system, in their kinship system that can take care of this child? Because what we know from the data is that child separation is so much more traumatic, and all things being equal actually leads to worse outcomes for the child than if the child had stayed in a poverty situation. And so I think what we want this law now to do is look very closely. Is the issue that's facing the child something of abuse and neglect? Which if it is, do what you need to do there. But if it's an issue of like poverty, like food insecurity, housing insecurity, job insecurity, can we get the parent those resources that they need so they can do right by their child? And then if that person really can't do it because they have, maybe some mental health issues, substance abuse issues, is the second parent available if the parents aren't together? Is the family of the second parent available? Is the family of the first parent available? Are there family friends in the neighborhood that can take in this child? And that's the purpose of it. And so what we've done in the bill, it'll start as a phase-in program in both Hennepin and Ramsey first in 2025. We'll collect data from them for 2 years to see kind of what worked, what doesn't work, what needs to be changed and managed. So that way, when it goes out to all 87 counties in 2027, it can be ready to roll. We're really, we also put in some funding in there for some cultural competency training for our child welfare workers. So that way, when they go into a family of color or go into a family that's facing a lower socioeconomic position, they are not having a knee-jerk reaction that like, oh, a window's broken or the heat doesn't work or the air conditioning doesn't work. I got to remove this child. And it's like, no, it's not about that. It's about providing those resources. So we have some funding available for that too.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
take a minute to talk about the historical context. Now, you may not know it, but I do, because I've been around this discussion for a generation. But
Yes.
from your understanding, what are some of the grassroots common considerations, the fears and the activism-driven motivation from the community on this question of out-of-home placement and adoption? What are
Yeah.
your thoughts? And I'll interject what I think I know.
Yeah, no, definitely feel free to interject. I mean, I've heard of so many stories from so many people who have worked on this much longer than I have. What they were telling me, and that the history is that at some point in time, it seemed as if Minnesota had a fairly decent child welfare system, but somewhere along the line that started to disintegrate. And so there has been a higher rate of child removal in Minnesota, particularly for Black children. They're anywhere from 2 to 7 times more likely to be removed than their white counterparts. And so that just disrupts the family. And a lot of us talk a lot about like how family is so important, family values are important. And so I think what you see from that is the ripple effects of if a child is removed from their family, from their parents, then maybe they're not able to really continue with school. Maybe there's some behavioral problems. Maybe there's, choices that they make that they wouldn't have made if they were within their own community. So those are some of the stories that people were telling me. And I know that folks have been working on this for a while. Ann Hill, who's the ombudsperson for African-American families in Minnesota, has been a longtime champion of this. She has said that they have tried various iterations of trying to ensure that the child welfare systems are looking at Black families very carefully and with intentionality. And sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't. And so I think this is another step in that direction. And we're hopeful that with now a law behind us, that will ensure that, these programs that we're putting in, that'll have some teeth to it. One thing I will state is there is also room for an advisory committee. Mm-hmm. So if folks are interested in being part of that advisory committee, I recommend them to reach out to the Department of Human Services to get on that, because we need your experience, we need your stories, we need your solutions to ensure that our county workers are doing what they're supposed to do.
So I think what you have shared is what I would call, as an observer and a newsman, a benign and compassionate and forgiving analysis. I think it's true. What you said is true, but I think it really gives and leaves a benefit of the doubt to the general good intentions of the society. And from within, however, I bring a critique that is more sharp and more jagged, and that is more cynical. And here's the cynicism. So listen to me if you wish here. Let me drop this on you. There was a sense in our community that managing Black children became an enterprise, a business for white families. And so there was an argument that white families were looking at the removal of Black children from Black families as a cottage industry. The state provided resources for child care, for adoption, for foster care that were generous. And though the mechanisms that managed that process routinely overlooked or denied the opportunity to get those resources to next of kin or kinship connections or community connections, there was the argument from the broad community that, look, what Black kid wouldn't be better living in Cokato, Minnesota, or living in Edina, or living in Deep Haven? There was a presumption that anything white, by definition, was better than anything Black, that any child that had a chance to go live with white people was better off and lucky. Now, the truth of the matter is there probably have been, and there must have been, there obviously have been some great human beings who rose to the challenge and said, we want to provide a space and a place with love and caring and accountability that supports that child. But I think that the criticism is that there were some places where there wasn't that compassion. And the most important thing is that there was a system and a process that excluded consideration of Black people in caring for Black people, Black children playing for Black families caring for Black children. So that was the cynicism. And then parallel to this, Representative, the American Indian community successfully on the same track challenged the history. So the question is, well, you black people are always complaining. Why would you accuse us of not being good for black children? Well, we look at the history, and the history details the destruction of Native families and the wholesale state-sponsored removal of Native children from their parents and their communities and being placed into white encampments, they called them schools, and boarding schools, where there was an attempt at erasure of their identity and their culture. We feel the same thing was happening in the black community. So we think that what you have done in creating a new approach and funding to support cultural specificity, cultural alignment and connectivity, valuing culture, viewing culture as an asset, not as a liability, is a game changer. That's my response. What do you think?
No, you're totally right. You are definitely, I was trying to take the diplomatic route, but but no, I mean, that is definitely something we heard all the time. If anyone goes back and watches the testimony, that is what people said, that they felt that their children were being unfairly taken away from them. They did not have the opportunity to defend themselves. They did not have the opportunity to designate other caretakers for their children that they believed, particularly white families, had that opportunity to do. And so, you know, and that history that you recounted, I mean, just, I would say that like the history of white supremacy throughout the country has been one of family destabilization for a lot of different backgrounds. And even for Black people, I think from the beginning of chattel slavery, that was all about disrupting those families there. And I think that has continued in states like Minnesota, where we feel that like, oh, everything's fine here. It's not. And as you said, I definitely heard that from the community, that they believed that, and not only just believed, but there was data to back it up, that Black children were being removed unnecessarily at higher rates for the same or similar offenses that white children were not being removed for. And that is patently unfair. And so what this law tries to do is say to our workers, you have to be fair now. You have to put in that time, that effort, those resources to find those connections. And there's still more work to be done. Like, you know, I want to let people know this is not an end all be all. We haven't solved the problem. But one of the other things that I think people will come back and work on is how to ensure that in the foster care system, we have enough Black people who can take care of Black children, that we do make it, you know, enticing for them to want to step up to be those caregivers, should that be their calling, and that they have the resources to do so, like you said. And so I think there's still a lot of iterations that are going to come to make sure that this law is working the way that we want it to. I think there's still a lot of support systems that have to come in to make sure we are providing for these caretakers, for these children. And I think just like there's a lot of things that we have to think about. How are they interconnected to ensure that families do have the infrastructure that they need, that should they do hit a rough patch, child welfare probably doesn't need to be called, because they can reach out for another resource to keep their family intact. So
before we close, Representative, I want to have you think about this question for one of our viewers, Mike V, who wrote a greeting, Baragani, to me. And he said, I wonder if the decision to select our governor makes Minnesota a battleground state that forces everyone to pay attention beyond the trauma of police brutality. That's a big question. Don't address that now. Think about it for a second, because I want to do two more things before we come to that. Mike V, thank you for always being around and for always bringing good questions and comments to the conversation. But Representative, first, I'd like you to speak about the question, and it's adjacent to the question of home ownership and families and family preservation, opportunities for home buyers and tenants' rights. You have been a leader in that area. Home ownership is the principal source for wealth creation in America for everybody. And the numbers in Minnesota have been dismal for Black homeowners. And you are addressing that. You're also addressing the question of affordability and the rights for tenants. What has been your position, and what do you say have been some victories? What lies ahead to keep home buyers, wealth builders, tenants on a positive path? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a major issue for me. I think I've talked about it many times on your show. I mean, we did get some wins this year. We got funding for down payment assistance. We got funding to try to build more housing. We are leveling the playing field in the court system for tenants if they do have to go up against their landlords, all of those things. And to me, it's really important because we do have a housing crisis. There are literally not enough homes for people to buy or to rent. And the ones that are available are too expensive. There is, I forget the gentleman's name, but the rent is too damn high, you know? And so it really is just, it's one of these things where as a renter myself still, like I know that life. I live that life.
Mhm.
And it's really important that we're making sure that we're doing all we can to bring prices down. And that will require more building, but we want to make sure that we're building in a way that's like inclusive, that focuses on what a community needs, whether, and you know, I think in a place like Minneapolis, that's going to look like more density, that's going to look like more access to public transportation, more access to various amenities. I think in the suburbs that might look like you know, is there parking here? Are there multifamily units here? Are there duplexes? You know, whatever it is that the community needs, we want them to be able to build that. And so one of the things that we're going to have to run back is what we call the missing middle bill. And basically that was going to be a way to have kind of a baseline zoning structure for the state of Minnesota. So then that way communities could really figure out what they needed to build and how they could build it and how they could get more people into homes. There still needs to be a lot more education on it. Again, this is one of these areas in Minnesota where a lot of people think that they support housing affordability and housing access, but when it really comes down to it, of like, it's going to mean building more in your community. It's going to mean opening your community to more people who may not look like you, who may not pray like you, who just come from a different background than you. People got a little riled up, and you know, I'm not calling anybody what they aren't, but like, we know what the history is. We know the history of redlining. We know the history of segregation. And what we are trying to do is remedy that. We're trying to give opportunities to cities, which we know cities have sometimes been the main opponents of this, to give them an opportunity to, what does building an inclusive city look like for you, right? And that's what our bill was proposing. And so we still need to do some more education on that. I'm hopeful that we will get there. But in the meantime, you know, we're doing what we can with putting funding where it's useful to ensure that those developers are able to have those resources to build where they need. When it comes to tenants' rights, one of the really big things we did this year is now tenants have the right to organize in Minnesota. So if you want to get together with your neighbors and form a collective to talk about, you know, rent increases, what maintenance should look like, what the community should look like, you now can do that without fear of retaliation. And usually that retaliation was eviction. And so that right is now protected in Minnesota. And we did a number of other things too, that if, you know, your landlord or, you know, the property manager, if they promised you a unit and it's not ready, they now have to compensate you for that. It can't just be, here's a gift card, goodbye, you know? So we did a lot of things like that. But I think at the end of the day, we're still very much focused on how can we make sure housing is affordable? How can we make sure housing is for people? I have a bill that I've got to run back again to, which is around limiting corporate home ownership. So that way homes are more available for actual individuals and their families. So what we want to do is try to curb the impact that we're seeing in other states of when corporations, equity funds, hedge funds are buying up whole single family homes and whole neighborhoods, and they're renting them out, and then they become absentee landlords. Those aren't the types of communities we want to build. We want to make sure that communities are full of people who are invested, who want to build their own generational wealth and want to build the community's wealth. And so it's important to us that we get ahead of that problem so we're not on the back foot of it like some other states are in the country.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm talking with represents House District 59B here in North Minneapolis, where Insight is headquartered and where I live. I'm one of her constituents, and happy that she's leading our community and a leading voice. You know, and I'm happy too that she brings the sort of a vision of young people being people connected to the language of the future. One of the phrases that's important to me is this notion of environmental justice. What does it mean? What does the environment mean? Why is it important? I think early on, people in my community, African Americans in particular, would say, the talk about the environment and saving the trees was kind of, something that white people did that didn't affect us. But that is far, far, far from the truth. And that our history as farmers, we were brought here to do farming. Number one, we've been part of the land and part of the environment from the very beginning. And we've got an affinity for that, but our contributions have often been both appropriated, but not given note. We haven't gotten the credit for what we've added to the culture, to the society. But environmental justice seeks to address that. A specific thing that the representative is involved in is the effort to close the what's called the HERC and the trash diversion system. Let me have you talk about that. Talk broadly about environmental consciousness that your cohort represents and brings voice to, but the specifics of it around HERC in particular.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's kind of the question of this generation, and particularly for the generations behind us. I mean, I talk to kids who are younger than me, and the only thing they care about is the state of our planet and where they're going to live. And I think you're right. I think a lot of us in a lot of communities have just sort of dismissed the environment. We're so worried about everything else. But I think one of the things about the environment that's really important, particularly from the environmental justice perspective, is, again, going back and looking how systemic injustices have affected the environments that we live in, which then affects our health, both physical and mental, the types of housing we're able to live in, the types of jobs we're able to get, the types of ways we're able to commute around our community. And so we know that there's a history that in communities of color in particular, there's a lot of dumping that goes on of pollution, toxic waste. Sometimes we are scheduled to live in places that are only meant for warehousing and industry. So then we're breathing in a lot of toxic fumes, which increases asthma, cardiovascular issues, brain development issues sometimes. And so we are living in places that are making us sick. And so what environmental justice seeks to do is, how do we clean up our environments in a way that everyone has the ability to live in a healthy space? And so that means you can better focus on your health, on your education, on your economic development, et cetera. So when it comes to the HERC, where a lot of activists and legislators are working on the same thing there, how can we move to...
And HERC stands for Hennepin County Energy, Resource Center?
Energy Resource Center. Yeah. And so that's actually right by the baseball field, right by Twin Stadium. If you go to the Twin Stadium, you're going to see the stacks of the HERC. And it's been up, I think, since like the 80s. And, it has actually outlived its life. But it's still going because it's the one place that we know how to get rid of our trash. And so we burn it. But when you burn trash, you are releasing more toxins. What comes off of plastics, what comes off of papers, what comes off of batteries, like whatever's in the trash, right? And so now that's in the air. A lot of it ends up flowing either to North Minneapolis or to South Minneapolis. And actually even across downtown. I mean, as a resident of downtown, that's falling directly on us.
Yes.
So that means that, parts of North Minneapolis in my district have some of the highest rates of childhood asthma in the state of Minnesota. What does that then mean for a child who has asthma, who has to miss days from school, who their parent may have to miss time from work? All of that compounds with each other. So we are fighting to how to phase out the HERC in order to make sure that we're moving to zero waste. So that means people have the opportunity for composting, people have the opportunity for recycling, whether you live in a single family home or a multifamily home. So I actually had a bill that passed this year for funding for a pilot program for composting in multifamily housing, because that's sometimes the hardest place to compost. And we want to do that at a larger scale across residences, but also business and corporate waste disposal, because we know that those are also some of the biggest culprits of our garbage. And so we want to make sure that we're moving towards a zero waste program. I think the emphasis on closing the HERC really just like puts a strong highlight on it. But we are working on the back end of like, where is the trash going to go? Because that is a real question. We don't want the trash in the streets. So.
And the question is not just local, though local it is. It's really a global question. So I want to ask you to sit back then and telescope out the impact of global warming, trash in the globe, and economic systems and processes that create this waste that is also toxic. And the side I want you to address is how this really presents itself not as a problem for us to say, woe is me, but an opportunity to mobilize ordinary people across the planet. To me, we've got a unifying opportunity to connect people in North Minneapolis with people in Salvador and people in Bahia and people in, say, Lagos or in India. How do we do that? How do we use this problem that affects all human beings in a way that what we do locally connects with what can be done locally everywhere on the planet? Before you answer that, let me just let people know that you speak with a certain authority, that Esther Agbaje, state representative, has championed, as she's talked about, efforts to increase affordable housing and to lengthen protections in the eviction arena for housing. She was also a leader on the program to provide down payment assistance for first generation home buyers and updating tenant landlord laws in Minnesota to support tenants. And she's also worked, she didn't talk about this yet, to pass the Crown Act into law in 2023. And she also worked to advance reproductive justice protections. She is a senior staff attorney with the Public Health Law Center. They provide legal technical assistance on commercial tobacco and climate justice. And prior to joining that organization, she practiced medical malpractice and general civil litigation. She's also a former Foreign Affairs officer with the U.S. Department of State. In that role, she managed rule of law projects in the Middle East, focusing on Egypt and the Gulf states. Wow. And so I kind of want to finish out this conversation, Representative, on, again, this question of the environment as a unifying opportunity. But since you've got this unique set of experiences as a lawyer, as an advocate, but also in rule of law in the Middle East, tie that all together for me. Where do you sit? Where do you stand? And how do you see yourself bringing those skills and gifts and the training that you have to serve not only your district, but our country, I say, to serve humanity? It's a big question. Take it anywhere you want to go with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a question I think about all the time, right? Like, I feel like in all the experiences I've had in my life, the common thread has always been about how can I make my corner of the world better? How can I improve the lives of the people around me? And so, in this position, I think that experience from working with people from different cultures helps me with working with people from different backgrounds across the state of Minnesota. I think some of the things that Melvin Carter, the mayor, was alluding to is like, at the end of the day, we're all people. We all kind of have the same basic needs. We all kind of care about the same basic stuff. And so if you can connect with someone on a human to human level, it's so much easier to figure out how you can solve problems. And we are in Minnesota and in the country facing really big problems. The environment, as we were just talking about, is one of them. This is the only planet that we know that we have, and we have to live here. And so it really makes sense for us to figure out, how do we do better with our environment? How do we do better with our health? And how do we weave in the knowledge from other cultures? As you were saying, African Americans, they were brought here, they're farmers, they know the land. Native Americans also know the land. There's so much to learn from those cultures about how we can be regenerative. Similarly, in the housing crisis, we know that it takes a strong foundation in order to build up yourself or your family. That requires housing. We have to start thinking, we have to stop thinking in a profit centric space all the time, but how do we actually help people? And, housing is one of those places where that's safety, that's home, that's refuge. If we can provide more of that to more people, what would we see in our communities that would start to turn things around? And finally, I think at the end of the day, we just always have to keep pouring into our young people. They're our next leaders, they're our next generation, they're our future. And we want to make sure that they feel included, that they have a voice in our system. And so I'm always really happy anytime in the work that I'm doing that we can engage young people who are at the forefront of these issues and hearing their ideas and working to implement them, because I think that just makes everything better for all of us. So it's kind of a big question, but I think every little bit that we do helps. And I'm just really glad to be serving in this moment. Really glad that Minnesota is on the map.
So listen, you and I are both first generation Americans. We both were born here, but we both have parents. I have one parent. You have two parents that were born in other countries. And so weave that in. Number one, how's your family? And
they're good.
How proud are they of you? Let me ask you that first.
Every day, I think any parent is always glad to see their kids thriving and doing well. But my parents are very, very proud. They're very happy, and me and my brothers are all doing well. And so I think it's just every day is a blessing.
So the question about immigration, that's another false division, I think, false divide, another wedge issue. And they are wanting to tell us that the enemy is people that want to come to this country. But everybody here came to this country. So my position is, let's figure out a way. This is a big country and we have room. We have room. How do we organize improving life for the planet by opening up and inviting and welcoming? That may be seeming radical even for the progressives, but what's your thought about the question of immigration, because it's on the table with this national election? How do we deal with our national security? But that security really is dependent upon the security other people have, where they come from, and how does the fluidity really shape the shifting of the future that we all have to share? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the question of immigration, again, big problem, big issue. We need to face it head on. I think at the end of the day, we really need to think about, why do people want to migrate, right? There's a reason why people leave home. Most people don't want to leave home if home is good. And so if we can help other countries solve the issues that they're facing at home that are forcing people that want to leave. And I also do think that means the United States also has to take a hard look at its policies of, are we perhaps the instigator in some of these countries that's making things difficult that people want to leave, right? So I think those are some hard conversations, some hard questions that we have to ask ourselves, but that can allow us to actually create the policy that will regulate the borders, that will ensure that people who want to come here and that have the right paperwork or whatever rules that we put in place, that it's easy to follow, and that it also doesn't take forever, and that we don't leave people in a kind of a purgatory state. And so I think it really makes sense that the United States, and I do hope the Harris and Walz administration will look really carefully at this, at what is the United States doing that we can actually be a better partner to countries so more people want to stay home? And for people who do want to come, can we make sure that, particularly if they're fleeing for asylum or refugee status, that they can move through that process quickly and that process is clear and concise? And then for those who do want to immigrate, because we do need, skills from everyone, everyone can work anywhere across the world, that it's also a simple process for them to come into. So I think those are the questions and answers we have to start thinking about, and the role that the United States can play, and hopefully that the role that our Congress, and with, on continuation of the Biden administration, but hopefully some new ideas from the Harris administration, we can really solve our immigration problem.
Representative Esther Agbaje, thank you so very, very much. So good to see you. Thank you for this time. And I'll be inviting you back again.
I know. I want to come back. I love
there's a gazillion questions I didn't ask you, but they'll come later. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Always good. Bye, Al.
I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Join us here for the Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you.